Today, I'm joined by George Pesansky. George brings more than 3 decades of experience in leadership coaching and operational excellence. He helps people and organization reach their full potential through clarity, focus, and practical strategies that drive results. His new book, Super Performance Strategies to Reach Your Full Potential for Yourself, Your Team, and Your Organization, gives leaders a systematic way for turning brief moments of peak performance into lasting success. And I'm excited to have him on the show to learn from his experience. So, George, welcome to the show.
Thank you, John. Really a pleasure to be here. Can't tell you how excited I am.
Yeah, it's great to meet you, and we have a little bit of a common bond, if you will. So I lived in Pennsylvania for a time, and you're calling from Pennsylvania,
I
uh,
am. Yeah. Beautiful, beautiful Pennsylvania mountains.
beautiful Pennsylvania mountains. Yep, I was in New York, and it was the snack food capital of America. So yeah, well, it's good to meet you.
Nice
So
to meet
let's
you.
kind of get into it. So the name of your book is Super Performance. So I just want to start right there. How would you define super performance?
It's all about reaching your full potential. And, when we think about reaching our potential, I think we always think of it as like an end state, that this is kind of where you finish the story. But the reality is that we reach potential many times a day. We have these ideal moments, sometimes even longer periods. And super performance is all about finding and understanding what creates those moments of clarity, those moments of success, and really being able to replicate them and stretch them and extend them so that we have ever growing durations of that super performance.
Wow, I love the concept behind it because I think when you say reach your full potential, a lot of people think, well, I'll never get there, right? So,
Yeah.
like I want to be this really inspirational CEO, I'm still working to get there and I'm never there. But what you're saying is that there are moments where you are that CEO, that you are that
Yes.
inspirational CEO, right? Is that what you're saying?
It is, and it can be, a lot of different ways to measure your full potential. It can be acting in that executive function, but it can also be, your, ability to be empathetic and really help somebody feel better. And that full potential of being able to really reassure a team member and help them really, establish greater confidence might be something that you don't do all the time, but you find yourself in that moment and you realize you may be doing something special, something unique, and something that really is part of your own individual potential.
I love that. So is part of the concept like just sort of developing awareness for the times that we where you are super performing?
It is. You mentioned in the beginning, my background is in operational excellence, and a lot of what we learn is about how to find root causes, how to eliminate waste and loss and costs and things like that. And certainly, there's an entire industry around, trying to understand what we did wrong. What I've learned over my career and what super performance is built on is the idea that the glass is often half full. And if we use those tools, those root cause analysis kind of techniques to try to understand when things are going really well, why are we doing it so well? And what is
Ah,
really the root cause, not just that proximate cause or that symptom that we're seeing, but what are those things that we could put in place as conditions and circumstances that are going to really help us be able to extend and replicate those experiences?
all right. So I'm a longtime manufacturing guy, Lean, Six Sigma, all that. So
Yeah,
you've got
yeah.
my attention with that stuff. So that's real easy for me to get that stuff. But
Yeah.
can you give us like maybe a concrete example of how maybe you could use some of these operational excellence tools to sort of uncover maybe a super performance you might have in your workday or in your, in a month or a week or something like that?
Yeah, yeah. I actually was just recently working with a client and they were experiencing some real manufacturing challenges. And they were really looking at things through the glass half empty kind of perspective of how many failures have we had, how many defects, how much waste have we created, how much downtime do we have. And they were setting goals for the team that this is the amount of downtime we're allowed to have. This is the amount of scrap or waste that we're allowed to generate. These are acceptable levels of performance. And this is not uncommon. You know it, being
Yeah.
the background in this. But if you think about it from just a different lens, we would never go out on a manufacturing floor or really any operation and say our goal is to only hurt a few people. Our goal is to only have a few folks, go home missing some fingers. So, as long as we're only having two losses tonight, we would feel pretty good about that. It's a ridiculous concept, and we don't ever go into, that circumstance thinking that having some losses and failure is acceptable. So instead of going in saying we're going to allow and we're going to permit and we're going to really encourage us to have a certain amount of failure, let's decide what is the duration of time where we're working in that ideal state. Maybe it's only 10 minutes, maybe it's 30 minutes, maybe it's 50 minutes. And this is true for every operator in any manufacturing operation. They know how long the machine has run without a problem because that really represents the work they have to do. Because when it has a problem, they're going to need to be fully engaged in fixing that problem. So they can tell you how long it's been since I've had to be climbing all over that equipment. If we really measure how long are we running without a problem and focus on what we're doing to have that time get extended and replicated, now we're actually getting into that level of super performance. And we're not encouraging people to say downtime is good or scrap or waste is acceptable at some level. What we're trying to do is take what's working and ask ourselves, what's preventing it from being longer? What's preventing it from being more frequent? What is the
Love
issue
that.
that's getting in our way?
Yeah.
And it becomes a much more kind of personal measure for the person doing the work because it's not at the end of the shift, how did we do, boss? It's, I know my goal is to try to get 2 hours of runtime out of this machine. And right now I'm at 90 minutes. And
Yeah.
I know what I can do to try to get to that 2 hours. And when I get to the 2 hours, then I'm going to focus on the 3 hours and the 3 hours to the 4 hours. And like any other task, breaking it into smaller, more manageable pieces is always the recipe to success.
So it's a bit of a mindset shift in terms
It is.
of, the root cause of problems. It's like, okay, yeah, we know this problem is right, but like how but we also know that we can run it effectively. Like, and how do we extend that? Right.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's remarkable how much organizations tend to know and how little voice that often is given because of the attention that's given to the place where the problems are, where the issues are, where the challenges are. And that ends up kind of absorbing all the oxygen in the room. And
Yeah.
what ends up
Yeah.
happening is known solutions really never get the chance to grow.
I love that. It reminds me a little bit of Ken Blanchard's, catch people doing things right. Because we
Yeah.
we
Yeah.
tend to
Yeah.
always focus on the wrong, but he
Yes.
said we have to catch people doing things right. And then you're saying, if we are doing things right, how do we extend that? How do we keep those trends going? Yeah, yeah.
Exactly.
I love that.
Exactly.
So you talk about the concept of golden hour, the golden hour. What is that?
Yeah, it's kind of the term that I use when I have this mindset shift with people I'm coaching with organizations or individuals. And we talk about that ideal kind of performance. I refer to that as that golden hour. And I
Okay,
ask them,
okay.
kind of where and when has that golden hour happened? And sometimes it's only a few golden minutes, it's not a
Yeah, yeah,
entire hour. And sometimes it's longer. But when you think about what I did today and you think about maybe the challenges, the problems, my to-do list of things I have to do tomorrow, you have to ask yourself, how often have you thought about what were my golden hours today? What were the things that went really well for me? And that can be for my team, for my organization, for myself. And what's interesting is that if we don't understand it, if we don't kind of explain it, I have a saying that you can't sustain what you can't explain. So if I don't really understand that golden hour and where and when it happened and what was the cause of it, then tomorrow it may not happen because I
yeah.
didn't even know. I didn't even realize, or if I did realize it was a good period, I don't know why it was a good period, which means tomorrow is going to be, another random act of trouble.
Really, I really kind of resonate with this. This is really good. There's a book called The Leadership Challenge, and the authors did a lot of research in it, and they asked the question, when you as a leader are acting at your best, you do what? And it's
Yeah,
almost a similar tact, which is recognizing that we are never perfect all the time as leaders, but when we are operating at our best, we're in that golden hour. What are the
exactly.
things that we do? And so and
Yeah.
Yeah, and they identified like the top five answers all over the world of the best, what the manager said, what they did during when they were acting their best, and that's what they teach. But it's almost taking it's similar to your idea, which is like, what is that golden hour? What were you doing right, and why? And also, I love what you say is, why was I doing it right? Right?
Exactly. And just like any root cause analysis, I'm sure you've done many. It isn't just about, again, those sort of symptoms and those surface issues. You got to ask those deeper questions and kind of get beyond the obvious, and finding kind of, these are the decisions that I make, these are the tools or the equipment or the technology I use, or these are, more importantly and most often, the systems I depend on. And that human physical latent is exactly what we look for in a failure. It's also what we look for in a success. And, when you can say that using this system or making these decisions or using this technology has really made a difference in my performance and given me that golden hour kind of opportunity, knowing it is the first thing, knowing why is the second thing, and then being able to act on it, obviously, is the third.
Well, obviously, I love what you're talking about. I love the idea, but I'm thinking to myself the idea of negativity bias in terms of the way our brains work. We're always sort of,
Yeah.
even as leaders, we tend so catch people doing things right is a hard thing for us, right? We're always catching people
Yeah.
doing things wrong. We're always finding the problems, right? We sort of like are like mosquitoes to the bug light when it comes to problems. But how does that impact our thinking, or how do we get around the negativity bias to be able to think this way?
Organizations often talk a lot about culture, and I think culture matters so much. It's what, leaders set in the tone and what they create, obviously, in their actions. And negativity bias is part of what ends up being a part of the culture if you allow it to be. And I'll give you a great example. A number of years ago, was working with a company, and lots of, again, problems in your manufacturing operations. My favorite thing to do is to go out and work nights and actually run equipment and actually spend the time, with the people on the floor. And notice this operator was just constantly making changes, constantly making adjustments, constantly changing and constantly doing things. And I said, "How do you know what to change and when?" He goes, "I don't." Why would you be changing it? Well, if I sit in the chair, I get yelled at. So as
Oh,
long as I'm up on the machine and I'm making changes and looking busy, then nobody hassles me. And what I took away from that and what I brought back to the leaders in that organization is this idea that we want everyone sitting in a chair,
yes,
because what we want is nothing going wrong. And we've kind of created this sort of situation where we assume that by sitting in the chair, you're lazy or you're wasting time or you're not performing. And the reality is, what I've done is I've set everything up, I've inspected, I've checked, I've cleaned, I've done everything right. And now I'm just going to watch it. And that
yeah,
would be a really good night. That culture where people say, well, no, I don't have negativity. Well, in your actions, in the decisions, in the way you reinforce, you're actually potentially creating the circumstance where we're assuming things are wrong. We're assuming you're making a mistake. We're assuming you're not doing the work. And that's where it has to start. It has to start with this idea that everyone is here to contribute. Everyone is trying to do their best. Everyone does want to have the ideal outcome and result. And then it's okay if people disappoint you, but it's not okay if you assume something incorrectly.
I love that. Reminds me of a story when I was running a plant in Hanover, Pennsylvania, a large manufacturing plant. I was walking the shop floor, and there was a guy sitting in a chair by the machine. The machine was running great, and
Yeah.
I was still fairly young in my career, but I said something sarcastic. I said, "Are you comfortable?" Because he was sprawled out in his chair, and
Yes.
he said, if I'm sitting here, you're making money. And
Amen.
I thought to myself, I said, "You got a good point." I walked away, but isn't that true, right? And
It
so,
is.
but as a leader, you want to say, well, you shouldn't be sitting there. You should be cleaning, or you should be
Yeah.
adjusting, right? And so it's
Yeah.
hard for us to accept that. Yes, if that operator has got everything dialed in and is running, and we are making money, right?
It is. It is. And, I do think there's an element of like sitting in the chair and being completely unproductive, obviously not necessarily being a positive thing. But I think, the point being that if nothing is going wrong, then why would I want to be making changes? Why would I want to be,
Yeah, yeah,
adjusting and changing and altering and doing things? That culture that we want your job to be easy. We want your job to be safe. We don't want
yeah,
you interacting beyond that zone of safety. Well, great. Like, how do we do that together? How do
yeah,
how do
yeah.
we how do we sit in that chair?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. How do we encourage that behavior? Yeah, get
Yes.
it running. Yeah, I love it. Um, so one of the things that you talk about, and I'm interested to hear your take on it. You say that like just the factory parking lot can give us clues about employee morale.
Yeah.
Now, I have an opinion about this, but I want to hear what your thoughts are on this.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's something I put into the book, Super Performance, and I actually almost didn't put it in because I just thought it was something everyone already knew. And
Yeah.
now, as I'm getting feedback in the book, and certainly talking to others, it's not as common as I thought it may be. But when I visit factories, I think of it like industrial tourism. Kind of getting out and being able to see things. And I never want to go through the front door. I never want to go through like the visitor, process and, go to the plant manager's office and all those things. I want to go through the employee gate and I want to go to the employee break room. And if we are going to sit down and talk about stuff, I want to do it where you would talk to those employees. I want to see that space. I want to see that organization. I want to see those things. And what I'm trying to do is really understand what's it like to work here. And when you find earplugs in the parking lot where people have just sort of tossed this stuff aside, it's because they want to leave. They want to
Mm,
get home and they really don't want to think about things again. They don't have a lot of care. There's not a lot of, kind of commitment and pride. And to me, seeing those earplugs laying in a parking lot as I'm walking in the employee entrance, you can almost see the path of them where everyone's tossing them as soon as they come down the steps. It tells you that this is a frustrated bunch before you even met the first one.
yeah, yeah. I agree with that. I agree with that. Yeah. One thing I always notice because I've run 9 manufacturing plants in my life, and so but
Yeah.
when I take over, I usually looking at the parking lot when I first. That's the first thing I notice, and the thing that gets me is the all the assigned parking spots close to the door. And that one drives me crazy more than anything. And so that's one of the
Yeah.
things. The first thing I do as a new plant manager is we paint over all the signs and we just make every so whoever gets here first gets the best parking. No one gets
Yes.
any special privileges here. So and
Yes.
I did because
Love
it
that.
yeah, but it always bothers me is the people that are working the hardest are parking the farthest away from the door, and the person that has been sitting at their desk all day gets a premium spot. That always bothered me.
Absolutely. Yeah. I love that, creating that equality that we're all here to do the same work, right? It's just
Yeah,
a question of how each of us contribute. I love that.
exactly. Yeah, we're all part of the same team. We just have different
Yeah.
roles on that team. Yeah,
That's
I'm no
right.
better than you because I'm running the plant. In fact, I'm
Exactly.
less important than you are, right? Because I am not
Most
touching the
expendable.
product at all.
Exactly.
Yeah, I
Yes.
love it.
Yeah.
You say that there is a similarity in the movie The Matrix to the idea of firefighting at work, and what I mean by firefighting is running around like a chicken with their head cut off. But tell us a little bit about the how those two are sort of related.
Yeah, I have I don't know if it's a maybe a upbringing in my age or something, but I have this fascination with the Matrix as this really great comment on society. And there's a particular scene that many might remember in the original movie, not the stuff they made after, that was where Neo was trying to bend the spoon. The child was in, the Oracle's apartment and was really trying to bend the spoon, really trying to make something happen. And I see, organizations really focus on the spoon. You'll get, the management team, the engineers, the leaders, and everyone's looking at this problem and they're really firefighting like what's going on. They're really trying to kind of bend the spoon. And the wisdom is you don't try to bend the spoon, try to bend the world around the spoon.
Mm,
And I think it's just such a brilliant analogy of manufacturing and really any operation that the problem you're having is a symptom of the conditions. It's a symptom of the systems, it's a system of the circumstance. And although you may be fighting that fire, dealing with that issue, kind of trying to bend the spoon, the reality is the system of a lack of maintenance, the system of a lack of a dedicated training program, a system of a lack of, good metrics or, feedback for operators is what made it be a fire. And if we
Yeah.
fix those
Yeah.
symptoms, if we kind of fix the world around the problem, then you can kind of make that do whatever you want. And I think too many leaders sort of focus on the spoon. They don't focus on the world around the spoon, all the symptoms and issues.
I agree with that. And I always think that, like, so this is just me, the way when I come into a plant and there's a lot of firefighting, a lot of chaos, and a lot of everybody's running from one side of the plant to the other trying to solve problems. I'm like, well, this is a major problem for me. Like I
Yeah,
want this to be I want every day to be boring. Like boring,
exactly.
repetitive, everything gets done. There's no, there's so I think our job as leaders is to create the culture and environment where there isn't chaos, where there isn't
Yep.
firefighting, right? And that doesn't mean that when we do have a problem, it's all hands on deck. We attack it as a team to get it solved, but that should be an unusual event, not a daily event. And a lot of businesses I've seen is it's a daily activity, and people are, it's part of the culture. They're rewarded for being heroes, right? For being firefighters, well, and
Yes.
so it just perpetuates itself instead of saying, look, we're going to stop doing this, right? um yeah.
Yeah, it really hits on a very important theme to me personally and also in the book. My father worked the same manufacturing plant for 42 years and worked his way up, not ever going to college, but eventually being, a senior fellow engineer. And he was the consummate firefighter. So any piece of equipment, any issue, any problem, he's rushing in Saturday night, Sunday
Yeah.
morning, staying late, doing this. Nobody would dare touch equipment because he's going to go fix it. He's going to correct it. And that was the role he had for that organization. And they loved him for it, and they did really, really well. I know my father really, really well, and I see him now when I visit factories, and it's in a new form, it's a different person, but it's the same story. It's exactly what you described. It is somebody who is extraordinarily committed, extraordinarily knowledgeable. Their heart is absolutely in the right place in terms of wanting the team to succeed, and they're playing their heart out on the field. And what they don't realize is this is the reason the team is losing,
Yeah.
because every single one of the times they go out and they try to make the basket, they try to make the field goal, nobody else on the team knows their way to assist. Nobody else knows how, that system is actually going to work. And I actually have developed it as kind of a strategy, much like your, kind of parking lot strategy when you started a new organization. After kind of taking that employee tour and kind of getting a feel, maybe working a few nights, really getting the grit, the real story, you start to figure out who your superheroes are. Who do we
Yeah.
depend on? Who's the one that's going to swoop in? And if you follow them around, they'll show you every broken system, every
Yeah.
broken process. And now the question is how do we kind of put them out of business?
Yeah.
How do we help them contribute, but help them contribute by teaching others how to do what they do?
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. So it's almost like, it's like a team where you have a star who everybody gets the ball to the star, in the last
Yeah.
5 minutes, and hope for the best, and everybody backs away versus everybody knows what to do in the last 5 minutes and everybody's contributing versus just one superstar. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. We actually have a whole chapter in the book with the men's Olympic basketball team that there's probably a lot of opinions, but in the 80s that situation where all of the stars were on the team and they failed miserably
Yeah.
for that exact reason, that every one of them wanted their own playing time. Every one of them wanted, the snippet on the news at night. Every one of them wanted, kind of their reward, and they didn't play as a team.
Yeah.
And the record showed it.
Yeah, and contrast that with America's hockey team, which was a bunch of no names
Exactly.
that beat the Soviets, right? And they played as a team.
Exactly.
They played their hearts out as a team, and
Exactly.
what a
Yeah,
difference! Yeah, yeah.
absolutely.
Um, so one of the things you also talk about is this idea of a Goldilocks zone. What
Yeah.
what do you mean by that term, and why do so many managers sort of end up in this zone?
Yeah, this is like, the place where you want to be, like where everything is all right. And I sometimes also call this the prison of expectations.
Hmm.
And it's a huge challenge as a leader. I mentioned earlier the idea that I'm going to set a goal for the amount of downtime that my equipment may have. And what ends up happening is that the operator who's running that equipment, if they end up, in a situation where they're going to be close to not meeting the goal, there's often a lot of tricks that they can pull out of their bag to
Hmm.
just get over that goal. And what we find is the majority of our performance is just 1% better than the goal we were set because nobody wants to get hassled, nobody wants to have a problem. But the reality is if it was their own business and their livelihood depended on it, we actually could do 10% better, 15% better,
Hmm.
20% better.
Yeah.
And, this Goldilocks zone of saying, I want to be good, but not too good. All right. I want it to be hot, but not too hot. No, not too cold, not too hot. I don't want to fail. I don't want to be, kind of seen as somebody who didn't perform. And the reality is the more visible the metric, the more, kind of high the stakes, the more likely it is I'm going to hedge the performance because I don't want to do too much because then the future expectation is going to be that I can do this all the time.
Yeah.
So I'm always going to hold back a little bit because I don't want to kind of reset your expectations. And that dance between, kind of leaders and teams and kind of finding our place, in my opinion, is the key difference between a high performing team where everybody kind of leaves their heart on the field and everybody knows their role in the outcome and the team that, is okay, but none of us are going to play that hard because we don't want to be expected to do that every Sunday. But we did everything that you can't say that we're not doing our job. That
Yeah.
that difference between the JV and varsity squads, you can see it, and it's often associated with metrics.
Yeah. 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 I see that a lot. I mean, I remember, just being a business leader all those years in corporate, that was always a thing. Like, don't crush your numbers. Like,
Exactly.
once you made your budget, like all of my peers would say, you better slow down because they're going to add 10% on whatever you do for this year on to next year.
Yes.
Because they would, we used to call it, turning up the treadmill. Right. So the
Yes.
culture was whatever, didn't matter what, if you had a one-off situation or whatever, it didn't matter. They would ratchet up your goals every year based on what you did the prior year. So
Yeah.
you would only punish yourself if you exceeded your target. So the culture was get to the budget and then enjoy yourself. And so
So,
yeah.
yep,
Yeah,
just that little bit more.
because they
And
yeah, because they knew the pain was coming if you exceeded your budget. Yeah.
yeah, and it goes back to the culture. And what's
Yeah.
what's interesting is, we go back to that operator sitting in the chair. Both of us had experiences that are kind of similar. Um, well, if that operator is sitting in the chair because everything is sort of working at that standard rate, but if they got up, if they did a few things, if they trained some other people, we can work at a record breaking rate, things that you may not even really appreciate because when we had some problems, I actually ran for a good hour and did things that we wouldn't be able to typically say we could do for 8 hours, but I know we can. I just purposely pull back because then you're going to make me do that all the time.
Yeah.
That reality, and leaders recognizing that it's a thing, that,
Yeah.
it's not just, your team is only going to be worth the 2 extra% they gave you this year. No, that's not true. It's this
Yeah.
mentality. It's this kind of, running the treadmill, that is
Yeah.
causing that issue.
Yeah, it reminds me. I tell this story a lot to my students. I teach college, but I had a new manager come in, and the company I was running was 70% market share. We were crushing it, and
Yeah.
he said, new manager came in and said, present me your business plan, and I did. And it was, I think we are going to grow the business the 10% in the next year, maybe it's 5%, just based on the market forces. It wasn't much more that we could grow. And he looked at my presentation, he looked at me, and he said, I don't like it. He said, come back with a plan to double your business.
Yeah.
And I remember just being really frustrated at him. Like, is this guy an idiot? You can't double your business if I have 70% market share.
Yeah.
Um, but we brainstormed with our team. We thought through it. And then my marketing manager said, well, maybe we're thinking about the problem wrong. And I said, what do you mean? He said, maybe we're not just thinking about not just what our product is, but what it does. If we think about what it does, the market is so much bigger than what we think the market is. As like
Yeah.
explain. And so we explored that, and we realized once we looked at it that way, that we had about 10% market share when we looked at the
Yes.
market in a different way. So we came up with a plan how to move into an adjacent product line. And we eventually did it, and we did double our business. But it was this idea of thinking, not to accepting that, a 5% growth, let's challenge what could happen. Right. So it's like literally throwing the Goldilocks out the door and saying
Yes.
what's possible, and that was a great example of someone who challenged the status quo.
It's a great example. It is kind of throwing that Goldilocks zone out. It is kind of breaking free of that prison of expectations. And it's often about risk. And, the risk of moving into an adjacent market is probably higher than just maintaining the percentage of the market I already have with
Yeah.
some
Yeah.
small incremental change. And, what's interesting, and I'm sure you've seen this in lots of the experiences you've had, is that when a company is operating in a way where we're not really worried about, the future of those jobs, the future of this site, the future of this location, we get into that Goldilocks zone. And unfortunately, I've watched this happen too many times where that fear starts to creep in because the
Mm,
reality that this may not be a permanent thing anymore, and there could be changes, and there could be closures, and there could be losses. It's amazing now the risks people are willing to take in the sense of how much better can we do? How much more can we perform? How much can we show?
yeah.
And also maybe the creative ideas of the other things we can do. But I wouldn't have offered it if I didn't think the reward was necessary because
Yeah.
I didn't need the reward before, but now I do. So that risk reward relationship and the willingness to take risks, I think it's so important for leaders to kind of encourage that and to foster that and make that a part of our culture.
I agree. And if anyone doubts that, study Nucor Steel, and you'll understand how you can do that and grow and just and
Yes.
continue to be successful year after year, and employees and managers working together to make their business better. That's fantastic. Well, this has
Yes.
been a great conversation. What final message would you like to leave with our listeners?
Yeah, oh, I really appreciate it. And I think it's really that you have potential in you that you likely don't even realize. Asking yourself, where have those golden hours happened for you, for your team? Asking yourself, why did those golden hours happen? You may discover that there's a lot that you can do to kind of get out of that prison of expectations, break free of that Goldilocks zone, and actually really reach your full potential and really extend the time and extend the frequency of those kind of flow states that you can find yourself in.
I love it. It's such a great way to think about the challenge of, a performance and high performance. How do you sustain performance? It's a great way to think about it, George. I really appreciate you bringing this concept to us, and sharing a little bit about the book that you've written. How can our listeners find out more about you and this new book?
Oh, thank you. Yeah, georgepesansky.com. And my company is myblendedlearning.com, where we provide all kinds of solutions related to everything we talked about today.
Okay, sounds good. And the book is available where?
Oh, yeah. We're on Amazon, Barnes& Noble, all major book platforms, both domestically, internationally, on both Kindle as well as audiobook and, of course, hard copy.
Well, fantastic. We're going to put links in the show notes for all of George's resources. And man, this has been a fantastic discussion. I really like the way George is thinking about these problems. Listeners, I hope that you're seeing the wisdom in his words, and how he's sort of changing the mindset and the way we think about the problems, and how we look at more as to how we extend these high performance in more effective ways. If you have a question, or if you something about George said really resonated with you, reach out to him. Follow the links below. Reach out to him. Get this book, Super Performance. If you want to be a super performer, you can learn about how to do it in this book. I highly encourage you to do that. The links in the show notes. I encourage you to do it. George, thanks for coming on the show. Thanks for sharing your insights, your wisdom, and this sort of creative way to look at performance. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me. It was such a pleasure.
Thank you again. Well, that is it for today. Thank you for listening to Deep Leadership. If you like this podcast, please subscribe and share so we can continue to build a world with better bosses. Until next time, this is John Rennie saying take care and lead well.